views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, I'm Jose Higuera, Deputy Director of the Mexican Studies Institute at CUNY. Welcome to one more edition of the Oral History Project. Today, I have the pleasure to welcome our guest, Felipe Galindo, Feggo. He's a Mexican artist, cartoonist, and illustrator. Also, he is an art instructor and graphic consultant at the School of Visual Arts. Welcome and thank you for your time. Thank you for being here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the invitation to be here.
Feggo, so before we start with talking about your trajectory, can you tell us about where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Yes, I was born in Cuernavaca, which is the capital of Morelos, a town near Mexico City. And that's where I grew up. We lived also in Central America for a few years.
What part?
In San Salvador. Yeah, my dad got a job there, so we went for a few years, almost 5 years. But we moved back to Cuernavaca, and I was there until I decided to go to Mexico City to study college. So,
and when you were growing up, were you into drawing, into arts?
I always liked to draw since I was a kid. I used to have little sketchbooks or notebooks. I fill them with drawings of Batman, Superman, superheroes, and Walt Disney characters. So I always was. I had that passion to draw all the time. So I guess one thing led to another.
And your parents actually encouraged you to draw, or was it more on your own time?
It was on my own time, but my mom really encouraged me to do that. My dad was a sportsman, so he wanted me to follow on his steps, but my mother realized I was more into the art, so I got the support from her. And then later my dad realized, okay, he can go to study arts.
Do you remember when did you start to draw more seriously? Like at what age?
Everything I was doing was basically, as I said, just to develop my skills. But there is like a need to do something. So instead of going in the afternoons to play with friends, I used to stay at home doing watercolors. And let's say if I was interested in sports, I would start drawing soccer stars or things like that. So it was. Not until I decided to go to college that I realized I have to do this more seriously. So, but that was another step because the instruction at college level is something else. So it's not just drawing; it has a broad,
like a broader just formation or what
yes,
is it, like a training, right?
Yes, because it involves reading. I mean, history of art, theory of art, design, graphic design. Sculpture, painting, so many options. And in college, you find out what you would like to do.
So tell us a little bit about this. So then you started to do it seriously or just as, not only as a hobby when you went into college?
Yes, when I went into college, I decided to absorb everything and to try to learn as much as possible of everything. I realized that to be a serious artist, you really have to get into, to go into that seriously. So I was reading history of art and started doing something completely different from what I was doing before. So I started doing geometric art, for example. It was, there was a...
And what year was this?
This is in 1974. That's when I went to college.
And what college? Was it in Cuernavaca? Was it
no,
Mexico
it was
City?
In Mexico City. I went to the National University, UNAM. They just had a new career called Visual Arts. It was going to be, it's a bachelor degree. So that's where I got the support from my parents because they said, okay, so you're going to college, not just a school to study how to paint. It's going to be a professional situation. So that's what I did. At the same time, I like to draw. I always liked cartooning, let's say. So at the same time I was doing that, I was doing my cartoons on the side because I like humor. It was, and sometimes the art can be very serious. So I began to do cartoons, and I decided to try to sell them, let's say, to the university. Had a couple of magazines, so I said, why don't I try my alma mater publications? So that's what I did. I began to publish cartoons at the Los Universitarios, was the name of the magazine, and in La Revista de la Universidad. I was doing, in La Revista de la Universidad, I was doing more serious drawings, so cartoons and serious drawings. So.
And how was it, your years in college? I know that after
Mm-hmm.
'68 and everything, the movement with the students and everything, was it also your cartoons, were they more political or was it more of general?
Not at that time. They were
aspects?
more general about just everyday life situations. Of course, we had the '68 movement, but by the time I was in college, it was already the intellectuals were more absorbing. Well, let's say not absorbed. They were more integrated into society as a critical force. So when I was in college, I mean, we had that kind of discussions, but it was not that as tough as before. Let's say we can be critical, but not. We wouldn't have any repercussions.
And did they actually influence your work while you were there, like in a sense, or no?
No, later on, almost at the end of my college years, I began, because I was reading a lot. There were not many things that you knew you have to really explore. At one point, La Revista Universitarios, they asked me to do a series of drawings based on the 1968. So I was going through the archives and finding magazines with photos that I never realized I mean, it was kind of a great learning experience. So I did a series of work about that. So.
And you were working with them. Well, that's great. And so, what did you have any professors or artists that were actually important or significant in that era, or like during your formation?
Yes, there was on my first year. They were giving us a broad scope of subjects to study. But in second year, I decided to study sculpture, but modern sculpture. So one teacher in particular, one professor, was very instrumental, he was very knowledgeable, and he was already famous artist, and he was a good motivator. That's what I wanted to say. So he encouraged us. We were a group of 6 students, and he gave us assignments, and we ended up doing a great exhibition with our works, and that led us to be chosen later to represent Mexico in a biennial in Paris of young artists. So we were really taking it seriously, and I mean, that's what I said. This kind of experience really make you a professional. So you really believe in what you're doing, and that's what I was doing for a few years. I continued doing geometric paint also, but after college I started doing, I mean, trying to make a living. Let's say now you're out of college, you have to make a living, and I continue selling my cartoons and illustrations. So that was an immediate thing, because when you have a body of work as an artist, you need at least to have 20 paintings and have exhibitions and see if they sell or not. So it wasn't that immediate response in economical terms, let's say. But in the cartooning and illustration was more. I mean, there were many markets, so it was something that I started to like. So I continued in that path.
That's great. Thank you, Felipe. Feggo. I always call you Feggo. So thank you, Feggo, for sharing this part of your story with us. And let's take a short break. Upon returning, Feggo will tell us when and why he decides to migrate to New York City. Welcome back to the Mexican Studies Oral History Project. If you're just joining us today, we are talking with a Mexican cartoonist and illustrator, Felipe Galindo, better known as Feggo. Feggo, welcome back again.
Thank you.
So, tell us, when did you decide to come to the United States, and why specifically New York City?
Yes, I was sent. I was working at the National Archives doing a research, some serious work, and they sent me to Chicago, and I was there for a week, and then I had a week off, and a friend invited me to come to New York City to visit him. So I came. I loved the city; it was very vibrant, and had a lot of possibilities in terms of magazines and publications. So this is in 1981. So the following year, I decided to come with my portfolio. I came for a month, and I showed my portfolio around, and I got a good response. But everybody told me I should be here to try to have more contact with people and editors. So I decided to come back in 1983 for 6 months, because that's the period that they give you like a tourist visa, right? So I said, I'm going to be with my portfolio, looking around. And that's what I was doing for 6 months, until I was about to go back, and I got a job offer. And so I said, oh, so I have to consider this. And that's what I did. So I always consider myself like an accidental immigrant. No, it wasn't something that I was planning to do.
So you came and you were really knocking on doors,
Yes.
and presenting your work, your body of work.
Yes.
And how was the art movement then in the 80s? You're saying like it was early 80s, right?
Yes, early 80s. I mean, New York has artists from all over the world. And in the field of illustration and cartooning, there are, I mean, the market is really big. It was very big at that time. So the competition is fierce, but also there is a lot of opportunities. At that time in the 80s, there were many artists from Eastern Europe, because they were trying to escape the communist countries. And in my case, I was, as I said, showing my portfolio around. But as I said, there was competition, but there was a lot of camaraderie. And I realized basically what is going to open the door for you is your work. If somebody is going to need that kind of work, you're going to get calls. And that's what I was doing. I was leaving samples of my work and started to sell little here and there in different magazines. And as I said, my intention was to go back to Mexico and send everything by mail. There was not even a fax or even express mail back then. But once I got this job offer, I considered it seriously, and I decided to stay.
Who offered you the position?
It was Barnes & Noble.
Barnes & Noble.
It was a small company back then, and I was going to be an illustrator and a graphic design assistant. So I said, okay. So and they were doing also books, so I was going to be doing illustrations for those books.
Oh, great. And so then you decided to stay here. You got this job offer. Was it like a work visa for a few years?
Yes, it was 5 years, almost 6, and that's when I later decided to apply for a green card. So it's a long process, and but every time, I mean, once you renew and renew, you start considering staying. So, and I remember when I got my green card, I told my lawyer, said, this is only for 10 years. I thought they were permanent. And she said, well, but you're going to apply for citizen, right, after 5 years? And I said, oh, I didn't think about that, but maybe I'll do that. So that's what I did. At the end of the 10 years, I decided to change status to citizenship.
Oh, that's great. Very well. And so in Barnes & Noble, you were doing cartoons and graphic design. Did you also experiment with other mediums while you were here, or?
Yes, in a way, I was working for the. As I said, I was doing as I was working with Barnes & Noble. I was also showing my portfolio to other places because, as I said, there are many opportunities. There were many magazines at that time, and I showed my portfolio to the Village Voice, and they gave me an assignment a very funny assignment about the coffee shops, which were run by Greek people back then. So I decided to experiment then, and I remember I got a coffee cup, and I like it because they used to have Greek motifs. So I cut it and I opened it, and I used that like how do you call the counter of the coffee shop. So I placed people around, and so I experimented and said, oh, I could do something like this with all the disposable materials, because there are I mean, I like the bags and boxes, and so I decided to start a new series called Use Reuse, in which I use all kind of materials that attract me visually. For example, I remember one box of Entelmann of cakes, and it has like a window. So I use that like a window of a deli store, and I do a portrait. I mean, like a landscape of a deli with people outside, and so I it's like a creative,
experimenting, right?
yes, experimenting and putting scenes of the New York City. So and it's more sketchy, let's say, than my regular work, which is very precise and clean. So I have these two bodies of works that
That's great.
complement. I mean,
And Feggo, and how was the environment for immigrant artists? Were there a lot of you mentioned some people fleeing communist countries? How was the environment for artists coming into New York City?
I think New York City has always been very welcoming to immigrants from all over the world, and I noticed that in the arts fields as well, because they, I think, when you come from another country to New York, you find always stuff that people take for granted here. Because you're coming from outside, you see with a different point of view, different eyes. So there's always these different propositions from people, from artists from all over the world. And I even remember one. There is a very famous artist called Ai Weiwei from China, who was here in New York for many years, and he didn't do much here. But once he went to China, that's when he became really well known. I think his experience in New York really nurtured him to create a new body of work with his country, his cultural heritage as a main ingredient. So
that's great.
So it's
and so you mentioned that you were experimenting, and you were also, I'm guessing, just getting to hang out with different artists. And what made you decide to go into cartooning, like into cartoons?
As I said, in Mexico, I like a lot cartooning. I was very influenced by Rius, which was very political, a political cartoonist in Mexico. And also, he not only criticized the government or institutions or companies, but he also proposed. He always had a way to give you something in return, not just criticism. So I said, well, that's really great. So I began to do political cartoon. It was not my main thing, but I decided to do it. Also, to become a cartoonist in Mexico and Latin America, we use pen names. That's what I created my pen name, Feggo, because my name is Felipe Galindo Gomez. So I use the G from Galindo and G-O from Gomez. So now in art, I was doing Felipe Galindo, and cartooning, I was doing Feggo. So I have like a double personality.
Thank you, Felipe, Feggo. Let's take a short break, and we will be back shortly.
Why don't you ever see elephants hiding in trees? Because they're really good at it. Yeah, I get it.
Welcome back to the Mexican Studies Oral History Project. We are talking with Mexican cartoonist Felipe Galindo, better known as Feggo. Feggo, so now tell us a little bit about your creative process. How do you begin with a blank slate or a blank canvas?
Well, everything can inspire me. I can find, I can see something or read something, and an idea will come out. So I always carry a sketchbook where I will write down this idea, and I have like my bank of ideas, and then I go to my studio and start doing the drawing, the final drawings. But at the same time, I like a lot art and I like history. So those are three elements I like to combine: art, history, and humor. So sometimes that will permeate my body of work in cartoons or illustrations. So,
And I'm guessing once you have all of this like material that you're doing your homework and you're, I'm guessing, sketching and everything, how do you pick a topic?
Well, that's, for example, I submit cartoons to the New Yorker magazine every week, and there is a variety of topics in the magazine or what the editors wants to see. So basically, I choose from different things. They could range from political to just everyday life situations, or unless I'm working on my series, then it's gonna be just based on that. Like the Manhatitlan series.
Well, tell us about Manhatitlan. How did it come to be?
Yes, Manhatitlan, for example, started as nostalgia. As I said, I didn't intend to stay, but after a few years, I became nostalgic of Mexico, the culture, and so I love. For example, when I studied in the university in Mexico, my college, the college was in what is now Mexico City, but in the center, what used to be the capital of the Aztec Empire, Tenochtitlan. It used to be an island. Mexico City was had a lake. And when I moved to Manhattan, I realized I was living in an island. And so I said, I'm going to create this new word, Manhattan and Tenochtitlan, Manhatitlan. I merged it. And then I began to imagine Mexican culture in New York, from the pre-Columbian to nowadays. So I began to imagine pre-Columbian sculptures like the Atlantes de Tula here on the subway, or having a break in Central Park, escaping from the museum or Metropolitan Museum, or also things like mariachi playing hip hop and kids dancing hip hop to the rhythm of mariachi. The Xochimilco trajineras in the Rio Hudson. So I began to imagine Mexican culture, as I said here. So that created the Manhatitlan project. At the same time, I also began to draw Frida Kahlo.
Wow.
Frida Kahlo in New York. She visited New York several times. So I began to imagine her here in New York, what she will be doing on her visits. Very whimsical. Everything is very whimsical. And a more recent series I have is about George Washington revisiting New York, because I moved 10 years ago to Washington Heights. And I said, why Washington Heights? And I realized it has a lot of historical significance. He resided in the area during the Revolutionary War. But the area now is very Caribbean, let's say. There are many Dominicans and people from Puerto Rico and Cuba and now Mexicans. So I was thinking, what would George Washington would think if he would come back these days to this neighborhood? And later I extended the series to all over Manhattan. And that I'm gonna present an exhibition in the middle of May. So at the Morris Jumel Mansion, which is where he was stationed during the Revolutionary War. So,
and have you mentioned George Washington, also Manhatitlan, Frida. Are you working also, and especially because it's political, your cartoons, and any about the current administration?
Oh, of course, it's about our current president. It's every day. There are news. I don't really sympathize with his politics. I'm very critical of his policies. So that started a series of drawings about that. I also have been doing a lot of series supporting the DACA and the Dreamers. So in that sense, I have been doing more political art. I mean, without trying to do it. I mean, basically the circumstances are really feeding me to come up with all these ideas,
Yes.
and that's every day. It's
The process. Thank you so much for sharing with us
Oh.
all of this, Feggo. And can you share with us, and also with our viewers, your social media and your handles?
Yes, my Facebook page is my name, Felipe Galindo, but I have also Feggorama in Instagram and Feggomania on Twitter, and I try to do to put some posts there. Also, I have Manhattan, the page Manhattan, where you can also see the series.
Great. Thank you,
You're
Feggo,
welcome.
again.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you all for joining us for one more episode of the Mexican Studies Oral History Project with Mexican artist Felipe Galindo, Feggo. We wish you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the Mexican Studies Oral History Project.